Soul Society. Do you think he is dead? In a clearing, two young kids were looking at a white-haired man who was laying on the ground, his eyes covered by a black shawl. What kind of questions are you asking? Of course he is dead. Otherwise, how could he be here? Ah no, I meant is he dead, like really dead? Well, who knows? Anyway, whether he is dead or not doesn't concern us. The academy opens its doors in a few days. We should prepare. You are right. Let's go. After those words, the two kids began to walk away, never looking behind them. Man, this world is so harsh. Even kids have no compassion. The moment they left, the white-haired man, Satoru Gojo, opened his eyes. It has already been a few hours since he entered this bizarre world. At first, he was rather disoriented. But after playing dead for a few hours and listening to different people, he had a better understanding of his situation. This was the afterlife. Despite how surprising this was, Gojo wouldn't be who he was if he let something like that bother him. Even though he died, he did manage to punch the greatest curse of mankind into oblivion. Haha, those kids better make a statue in my honor. Perhaps Nobara will even write a book about me? Thinking about his students, his smile dimmed a little. He had come to like the little team he was in charge of, and he had to admit that leaving them made him sad. But at least they were alive. Well, enough about this. Moping is useless. The most important thing at the moment was to know what he would do. Raising his hand, he looked at them carefully while frowning. I can feel a weird energy flowing through my body. But this isn't cursed energy. He didn't know how to describe it, but it was something pure. As the name said, curse energy was born from the malice of the human heart. From it, monsters known as curses could see the day, and people known as sorcerers used this energy to deal with them. In the first place, I am dead, right? So how come I can feel sleepy, tired, and hungry? This was another problem he didn't really understand. But the worst. He frowned as he focused. This lasted for a few seconds before he sighed. For some reason, I have managed to keep the 6 eyes, but I lost limitless thought. This was a heavy blow. Since he didn't know how to use his current energy, for now, he could do nothing. Even though the 6 eyes would be extremely useful in helping him control this new energy source, losing limitless means that he had lost more than 80% of his full power. Thankfully, he wasn't in a dangerous zone or anything of the like. I do not have enough information. I have no money, no house, and I am wearing some weird-ass kimono. Man, this is really a great start. I feel like the hero in an RPG. Even though the situation was rather dire, he was still able to laugh at it. It wasn't because he was naively thinking that everything would be alright. It was just that he refused to bow down to adversity. Standing up, he began to follow the road the two kids took. He could feel a large cluster of energy like the one flowing through his body. Those were his first steps in the Soul Society. After he left the place where he was previously laying down, it didn't take long for him to see what was most likely a city. Though, after reaching it, calling it a village or a slum would have been better. Once there and after asking a few questions, he surprisingly got answers rather easily. After all, most, if not everyone here had once been in the same situation he currently was. So this place is really the afterlife. Sitting on a rock on another side of the city, Gojo sighed wistfully. Somewhere in the corner of his heart, he had still been a little unbelieving, but now, there were no doubts. But what really ticked him off about his current situation wasn't him dying or appearing in the afterlife. I fought to protect the world, and after my death, I am sent to the slum of the afterlife? Or perhaps is it because I was cheating? But hell, it shouldn't have been enough to offset my good karma, right? He joked a little to himself before finally sighing once again. If all the information he received were accurate, then, he was in the Soul Society, more precisely in the 80th North District of a zone called the Rukongai. The zone where lost souls generally appeared. But out of all the information he received, the one that particularly caught his attention was Shinigami and Hollow. After dying, people generally had two destinations depending on their luck. Either their souls were guided by Shinigami and they could enter the Soul Society, or they became hollow and entered the Hueco Mundo. This is truly like sorcerers and curses. What's more, hollows are born from souls, and Shinigami are also evolved souls. Basically, they use the same energy source. Like how sorcerers and curses use cursed energy. What's more, Shinigami can visit Earth to kill hollows. This was very important. He didn't know what happened after he died. Even though he did manage to completely seal Sukuna inside Yuji, who could know what would happen if he could go back to Earth? Of course, this is with the assumption that time flows the same. At least, from the clothes and way of acting, he was sure that this heaven had a relation with Japan. But there were too many unknowns. But thankfully, he now had a solution. I need to become a Shinigami. So, where the hell I am? A young-looking silver-haired man stood in a forest while munching on hard bread. He couldn't help but frown as he looked at his surroundings. Hey, you, are you sure you aren't messing with me? Looking behind him, he glared at a brawny man who immediately began to shiver under his stare. It has already been about 1 week since he left the 80th North District, which was one of the worst districts ever. On his way, he had been mugged many times by different groups of bandits. But since they didn't hold any killing intent, he simply beat them up after taking away everything they had and all the information they could give. The one shivering behind him currently was his latest victim, and he finally decided that having a guide could help speed things along. Sir, I am not lying, this is really the most direct way to enter the First West District. Gojo frowned a little at how he went from north to west because he got lost on the way, but aside from that, he was happy to know that he was closer to his goal. The 360 districts of the Soul Society were divided in 4 directions and 80 districts for each zone. The closer the district was to the Siriitii, the better the environment. What's more, the only way to pass the Shinigami test for the academy was to reach one of the 4 first districts. Even in the afterlife, the distinction between classes still exists. Chortling to himself, he ignored the cowardly bandit and began to walk while whistling. Behind him, the bandit hesitated a little and thought about fleeing, but once he remembered how that monster in front of him beat up his entire team, he could only hide his desire to flee. This small movement wasn't missed by Gojo, but he didn't care. He was more busy trying to understand the energy flowing through his body. Even though he was currently unable to use Limitless or any of his curse techniques, he didn't waste his time, and now, he at least knew how the energy flowing inside his body was called. Ri-Iryoku. The inner energy which flows through all beings. At first, he was surprised at the fact that a soul could feel hunger, be tired, or even bleed for that matter. But, the answer was surprisingly easy. The more Ri-Iryoku a soul had, the closer their body's function became to humans. High-level souls could even have sexual relationships and give birth to children. In short, the Soul Society wasn't that much different from the normal human society. Well, I wonder how strong I am in this world. Those bandits were rather easy to beat, but he refused to compare himself to them. He needed to meet one of the so-called Shinigami and see how far he stood. I also need to master this technique. Perhaps I should learn the power system of this world. The only thing he could do as of now was to strengthen his body with this mysterious energy. But he hoped this wasn't all. He was no slouch when it came to martial art, but nothing beat the feeling of being all-powerful and completely untouchable. Secretly, he also hoped that learning the power system here would help him be able to use Limitless again. No matter, I am a genius. It shouldn't take long for me to learn. At the very least, he believed in the power of the Rokugan, 6 eyes. Back then, it was thanks to the combination of his Rokugan and his Limitless that he was hailed as the strongest sorcerer. Thanks to it, his control over his cursed energy had been so perfect that it feels like he had an unlimited amount of energy. Even now, he was sure that he just needed 2 or 3 direct examples on how to use this energy to get it. The only thing stopping him now was the fear of messing up his energy point by making the energy flow in the wrong way. A phenomenon extremely common for the members of his clan who tried to master Limitless even though they didn't have the talent necessary for that. He might be a genius, no scratch that. He might be an unprecedented genius, but he knew more than anyone else how dangerous it was to experiment without any frame of reference. They continued to walk like that for a while in total silence. The signs of life were becoming more evident once again, and he was sure that he was coming closer to the city. It was then, huh? A sharp scream resonated. The birds, startled, began to flee away. Looking at the direction of the scream, Gojo's brain immediately went into overdrive. His vision suddenly shifted, reaching far farther than anyone should be able to see. Finally, he was able to capture the scene. 2 seemingly young children, one a brown-haired girl and the other a silver-haired boy, were facing a red monster with a mask on its face. The girl was holding a sword, but from her posture and shivering hands, it was clear that she was still a newbie. What's more, from the blood flowing from her head, it seemed that she was already wounded. A smile formed on his face. It seems like I will be given a first-hand demonstration about how to use Ryuryoku. On the scene, the brown-haired girl stood her ground, her face ashen, but her gaze firm. Shiro, I want you to listen to me. Slowly step back before running as fast as you can. It's the first district, help should come soon. She still couldn't understand how they could be so unlucky as to meet a hollow in one of the first districts. Regular sweeps were always done by official shinigamis in the first 40 or so districts. But thinking about that wouldn't change their situation. Her hand shivered a little before slowly landing on her sword. Her sword still didn't have an aim, she was still just a first-year trainee, but she should be able to at least buy some time for him, right? Even though she was bleeding from a wound on her forehead, the blood thankfully didn't flow above her eye and block her vision. Momo! How can I leave you here? The young little boy sadly didn't have the same spirit as her. He didn't understand that by staying here, he was simply causing more trouble. Gritting her teeth, she focused on the hollow, who seemed content in looking at them squirm. It was clearly a low-level hollow, but still too much for a trainee like her to win against. I still do not master any Bakudo spell, so I must go all out with a Heido. She could already feel people coming, she just needed to stall for time. Raising her left hand, she focused her Ryuryoku enchanted. Heido and Degree 12. Fushibai. A net of fire suddenly formed and enclosed the hollow, who wasn't able to escape in time. Momo Hinamori could feel that her move lacked power, but she didn't have any time to perform a complete chant. The net covering the hollow was linked to her by a translucent red string. Kai. Boom. A powerful explosion resulted. Let's go. Hinamori didn't even wait to see the result and took the little boy in her arms before rushing away. Her action was proven to be wise, since as soon as she jumped away, the place where they previously stood was blasted open by a nearly unscathed hollow. She was about to completely flee when the hollow rushed directly in front of her, thereby blocking all escape routes. Despair clouded her face once she understood that even her struggle was futile. It was when she was about to throw the little boy in her arm and act as bait that she heard it. Oh, so this is how you use it. Turning around, she was surprised to see a rather handsome silver-haired man come out from the bush. Her expression warped at this sight as she shouted. What are you doing here? Flee. She immediately regretted her rash action as the hollow turned its attention towards the man, who surprisingly seemed completely unflustered. Heh, they really like curses, though less ugly, I guess. This idiot. She didn't know what he was mumbling, but it seemed to have infuriated the hollow, who lunged at him. She wanted to close her eyes, but it was then she felt it. A monstrous Ryatsu that seemed to push down everything around him. How was it again? Ah, yeah. Gently raising his hand, he murmured. Heido and Degree 12. Fushibai. Kai. Her vision was immediately dyed white. Shiro. Momo woke up with a startle. Before looking around her. Oh. You finally woke up? Her gaze landed on a silver-haired man sitting in front of a fire. Looking suspiciously at the man, she asked. Where is Shiro? You know, it's pretty rude to talk like this to someone who saved you. Hearing his words, she suddenly remembered what happened. The last thing she saw before fainting was this man using the same technique as her, but with a completely different output. Thinking back to how rude she had been to her savior, she blushed and apologized. Don't mind. At least you know how to recognize your mistakes. Gojo waved his hand. As for that little shrimp, he pointed behind him. There, the young little boy that accompanied her was bound by many threads and attached upside down on a tree. Wah! Gojo grinned as if he succeeded in a little prank. That boy wasn't as polite as you, so I had to punish him a little. Momo shivered a little before nodding. She wanted to plead a little, but before she could speak. Now, little lady, see, I didn't save you from a need to play at being the hero. Isn't it normal that you give me something in exchange? Well, what do you want? She stuttered as she asked. His eyes seemed extremely piercing as he looked at her up and down. Let me examine your body, will you? Her face became immediately completely flushed. Let me examine your body, will you? Her face became immediately completely flushed. Wah! 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 She began to stammer, so shocked that she couldn't even gather her thoughts correctly. After all, even thought she was already in her hundreds, she had died when she was a teen, and be it back then or Earth or here in the Rukongai, the amount of contact she had with people of the opposite sex was pitifully low. What should I do? For a genius like her who was already able to use Kido even though she entered the academy a few months ago, this was the first time she was stumped by a question. Hum. 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 Above her, she could hear the muffled screams of her friend. He was most likely trying to ask her to not listen or something. Sadly for him, those actions were what pushed her to make her decisions. With steam flying above her head, she lowered her trembling hand and slowly brought them toward her clothes. The man was without a doubt very powerful, and he did save their life. But, just as she was about to disrobe, she was stopped by a hand. Raising her head to stare at the man with her teary eyes, she wondered if he wouldn't even give her the right to take her own clothes off. Gojo meanwhile wore a rather bitter expression. He had just been trying to play a prank. How could he have thought she would react like that? This girl is more naive than I thought. She seems like the kind to be used then discarded by some bad man. Now, how do I explain that? He was smart enough to understand that saying that everything was a joke was perhaps the most stupid action. As such, taking a serious expression, he nodded. Well done. I was curious to see how far you were willing to go to repay your lifesaver. Your actions surpassed my expectations. Now, this is enough. When you are awkward, just bullshit your way out. This was a test? Indeed. I am sorry for the grief I caused. I hope you will forgive me. He had been bullshitting about the test, but he was indeed sorry. Making a young girl cry wasn't one of his hobbies. Though, making mature women cry in pleasure was something he very much enjoyed. E/N, what about traps? Wiping her tear with the back of his hand, he stood up and stretched his hand toward her. My name is Gojo. Satoru Gojo, what about you, little lady? Sniffing a little, she took his hand and stood up with his help. My name is Hinamori. Momo Hinamori. I am a first-year student in Shino Academy. Oh. Seems like I really hit the jackpot. Exclaiming in surprise, he said, incredible. So you are a future Shinigami? Then he frowned. I thought the entrance exam was underway? Momo shook her head. We have an entrance exam for new students every semester. Currently, the first semester students are on holiday. This is why I was able to come to meet Shira. Shiro-chan. Raising her head, she remembered how her childhood friend had been tied and suspended on a tree. Bowing to Gojo, she pleaded, "Gojo-san, I know Shiro-chan can be a little brash sometimes, but he doesn't mean anything bad. Please forgive him." Looking at the bowing girl, Gojo simply shrugged. He had always been a little weak about such headstrong but kind and naive people. Yuji was like that, and now he also had to deal with another one just a week after death. A few minutes later, a sullen white-haired boy was bowing with Hinamori. "Once again, thanks for saving us," Hinamori said before glaring at the boy next to her. Sighing a little, the boy finally opened his mouth. "I apologize for my previous conduct. My name is Toshiro Hitsugaya, thanks for saving us." Gojo stared quietly at Toshiro. He hadn't paid attention to it previously, but the amount of energy dwelling on this little boy seemed far larger than anyone he met previously. Since even Hinamori didn't have a third of his energy despite being a student, this means that either Hinamori was below average or it was this boy that was far above average. Smiling, he patted the head of the boy, who was resisting the urge to swat his hand away. "You should have already heard my name earlier. Now then, how about we go together to the first district? If this girl is like Yuji, then this boy is like Megumi. Even the way he acts is as cute as him." Teasing Megumi had been one of his favorite ways to pass time. It seemed that he wouldn't be bored for now. Hinamori accepted his proposal. After being nearly killed by a hollow, she was still a little jumpy, and being with someone strong was helpful. "Gojo-san, are you going to report the situation to the Siri-iti?" Gojo suddenly stopped and pointed at his own face in surprise. "Me? Why should I?" It was Hinamori's turn to be surprised. "Aren't you a member of the Kido Corps? The Kido Corps, alongside the Gotei 13 and the Anmatsukido, were the armed forces of the Soul Society. As the name indicated, the Kido Corps specialized in the usage of spells, and people excelling at all kinds of Kido were accepted. From the lack of a sword and his powerful usage of the Heido spell, Hinamori thought that he was one of them. Once she explained her reasoning, Gojo laughed out loud before finally answering, "Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you. Also, I am not even a Shinigami yet. I just entered the Rokandai not long ago." This time, Momo and Toshiro were completely dumbfounded. Momo even more so, since his weird words, when he saved her from the hollow, came back to her mind. "So, he really learned the Heido I used after just one look?" Feeling the gaze of awe on him, Gojo smiled. No matter if he was dead or alive, being gazed in awe was always a good feeling. "Come on. How long do you intend to pout?" But. Hinamori kept walking, her mind still reeling at the revelation. After his revelation, she still couldn't believe him. And as such, used a few spells she knew as a test. The result was devastating. No matter what she used, he simply needed to take one look to replicate it. The worst was that he didn't just replicate it blindly, but really understood the way it worked, even though he clearly suffered from gaps on the theoretical aspect. In the end, she could only kneel in defeat and accept his supremacy. She could now understand the feeling of shock her senpai in the academy felt when she became able to use low-level Kido without any chant just a few weeks after she joined the academy. Hinamori wasn't an arrogant person, but she had to admit that being praised as a genius so much until now went a little to her head. Now though, she understood that she could only be called a genius when compared to most Shinigami. Gathering her spirit, she clenched her fist. "Yash, I need to work even harder. Gojo could only smile dumbfoundedly at how fast this girl kept switching expressions. Still, she was rather funny. "Now that we have consensus on the fact that I am an absolute genius, why don't we speak a little? I am really interested in entering the academy, but getting some basic knowledge would be helpful." The last bandit he captured already fled the moment he rushed to save Momo. But he didn't really care about that man, so he didn't bother chasing him down. Hinamori nodded. "Well, Gojo-san, do you have any particular question?" Gojo nodded. He had one particular question. Something that really bothered him. Why can we bleed? He could understand powerful souls needing to eat, but he really couldn't understand why they could bleed. Even more so since low-level souls could also bleed. Hinamori smiled in understanding. This is a rather normal question. Hinamori closed her eyes in order to gather her thoughts. You see, in a sense, our bodies aren't different from human bodies. The greatest difference between a spiritual body and a physical body is its composition. Humans' bodies are made of organic matters, or, as we call it, kishi. Meanwhile, we are made out of a matter called reisha. Saying so, she raised her hand and began to gather energy in her hand. This isn't just our bodies. The grass on the ground, the clouds in the sky, the tree, even the very air we breathe, everything in the soul society is made out of reisha. At a certain level, some techniques can be used with reisha. Like the shuunpa. Sadly, first-year students like me still didn't learn it, so I can't show it to you. She seemed really regretful about not being useful, but Gojo didn't mind. It wasn't as if he could get all the information in one go. No problem. What about Ryuryoku? You know about it? Ryuryoku is something that every being, soul, or humans have in them. The greater the amount, the more powerful they can potentially become. From what I know, humans with a certain amount of it can even see Shinigami or affect wandering souls. For Shinigami, Ryuryoku is a little like the fuel we use to create our technique. Momo smiled. After Ryuryoku is Ryatsu. Ryatsu? Indeed. Ryatsu is a little hard to explain. Should I say that it shows the weight of existence? Powerful Ryatsu can basically render weaker enemies completely powerless. Since it's basically impossible to calculate the amount of Ryuryoku someone has, we gauge individual power based on Ryatsu. Saying so, she crouched down and used a stick to draw on the ground. In short, reisha forms the body, the vessel. Ryuryoku is the energy that fills the vessel and Ryatsu is the energy that is expressed. The more reisha your body is composed of, the more Ryuryoku you can have. The more Ryuryoku means a more powerful Ryatsu. This is the basics. Gojo mused a little. So, a powerful body means more capacity to hold energy and a greater ability to express it. This was nothing new for him. Still, he couldn't help but stare at Toshiro. His body doesn't seem that strong. Despite this, I can feel a great power in him. I guess he is a little Yuta. Yuta was one of his first students. A special grade jujitsu sorcerer. When he first met him, the boy had been scheduled for execution because of a power he couldn't control. Even now, his weak body was one of his weaknesses. Though, with his insane amount of cursed energy, it wasn't really a problem either. Also, he sighed at how he was trying to see his students in those two. It seemed that he missed his life more than he thought he would. Thinking about it, something suddenly occurred to him. Hey, have you ever heard about cursed energy? Curses? Or sorcerers? Hinamori and Toshiro looked at him in confusion. Curses? Are you talking about Hollow? As for sorcerers? I think the only human clan with power was called Quincy, not sorcerers.